Picture ancient Egypt for a second. Pyramids, pharaohs, temples carved with hieroglyphs. Now, picture ancient Rome, the Senate, the gladiators. Here's the question. Were any of these people smoking a cigarette? Sounds absurd, right? And it should, because the real answer is both absolutely not and far, far older than you'd ever guess at the same time. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the true story of tobacco is stranger, older, and more surprising than anything you learned in school. Because the answer wasn't hiding in Egypt or Rome at all. It was buried in a fire pit, in a desert, on the wrong side of the planet entirely. When people say smoking, they're usually collapsing two very different things into one word. There's the modern cigarette, the machine-rolled paper tube full of processed tobacco that you can buy at any gas station. That's an extremely recent invention, and we'll get to it. And then there's something much older and much deeper, the practice of using the tobacco plant itself, whether smoked, chewed, or otherwise consumed. And here's where it gets interesting. The tobacco plant, Janus nicotiana, is native exclusively to the Americas. It never grew in Egypt. It never grew in Mesopotamia, Greece, or Rome. The pharaohs never saw it. Caesar never smelled it. Every civilization we typically picture when we say ancient world had zero contact with tobacco for thousands of years of their own history. So if that's true, where does the real story begin? In 2021, archaeologists working at a site called Wishbone in Utah's Great Salt Lake Desert uncovered a small ancient hearth. Inside it were 4 charred wild tobacco seeds. When they were radiocarbon dated, the result stunned researchers. Roughly 12,300 years old. Sit with that number. That's about 9,000 years earlier than the previous oldest known evidence of tobacco use anywhere on Earth, which came from smoking pipes. This was long before farming, long before permanent settlements, in a world still shaped by the tail end of the Ice Age. Hunter-gatherers in what's now the American West were already interacting with tobacco, likely chewing or sucking on it rather than smoking it outright. Whether they were inhaling smoke at that point is still unclear, but their relationship with the plant is not in question. Some researchers go further still, suggesting humans may have eaten tobacco as far back as 18,000 years ago, long before anyone thought to burn it. The logic tracks. A hungry forager eats whatever's in front of them and finds out later whether it was a good idea. So, when someone asks, when did ancient people start smoking? The honest answer reaches back into a version of ancient most people never picture at all. Long before the first stone of a pyramid was laid, tobacco already had a relationship with humans, just on the entirely wrong continent for anyone's mental image of antiquity. As centuries passed, tobacco in the Americas became something far more significant than a casual habit. Evidence of domesticated tobacco in South America dates back roughly 8,000 years. Among the Maya, tobacco wasn't recreational. It was sacred, woven into religious ceremonies, healing rituals, and rites before war. Some researchers believe Maya priests were rolling leaves into a crude cigar-like form, wrapped in plantain leaves, as early as the 1st century BC. Aztec culture pushed the reverence even further. There was a goddess associated directly with the tobacco plant, and priests performing sacrifices wore gourds filled with it. Across North America, indigenous nations used tobacco in peace pipe ceremonies, in healing rites, and in councils where major community decisions were made. None of it resembled a casual habit. Tobacco was a way of speaking to spirits, ancestors, and the collective memory of the group. So for thousands of years, an elaborate, ritualized tobacco culture was developing and deepening across the Americas. Meanwhile, the rest of the world, the civilizations you actually picture when you hear ancient, had absolutely no idea any of this existed. Here's the real question people are usually asking without realizing it. If the Egyptians, Greeks, Romans, and Mesopotamians never encountered tobacco, does that mean they weren't smoking anything at all? Not quite. The old world had its own relationship with smoke. It just wasn't built around tobacco. Long before tobacco reached Eurasia, cannabis was already widespread, with use dating back to roughly 5000 BC. The Greek historian Herodotus described the Scythians throwing cannabis seeds onto heated stones inside a tent and inhaling the resulting vapor during funeral rites, essentially an early form of vaporizing rather than direct smoking. Meanwhile, civilizations including the Babylonians, Indians, and Chinese burned incense as part of religious practice, a tradition also shared by the ancient Israelites and later carried into Catholic and Orthodox liturgy. Across cultures with no contact with one another, the idea of inhaling smoke as a path toward the sacred kept appearing independently. Evidence for directly smoking a rolled plant material before the 16th century in the Old World remains genuinely contested. Some water pipe fragments discovered in Ethiopia, dated to roughly 500 to 650 years ago, tested positive for THC residue, but the finding is controversial precisely because it predates the commonly accepted timeline for tobacco's arrival from the New World, and researchers still don't have a clean explanation for it. The short version, no cigarettes in antiquity, but smoke, in one ritual form or another, was almost always part of how ancient people reached towards something bigger than themselves. If discoveries like a 12,300-year-old fire pit or Scythians vaporizing seeds over hot stones catch your attention, this channel spends a lot of time digging through exactly this kind of overlooked history. A like and a subscribe genuinely helps more of it reach people, and the part of this story where tobacco gets marketed as a literal miracle cure in European royal courts is honestly one of the strangest turns yet. Everything changed when Christopher Columbus landed in the Bahamas in 1492. The Taino people introduced Columbus and his crew to tobacco, and by most accounts the Europeans had no idea what to make of it, watching in confusion as people inhaled smoke and exhaled it deliberately. The real explosion, though, came a few decades later. By the mid-16th century, Spanish and Portuguese sailors had carried tobacco to Europe, where it was initially grown in royal gardens as an exotic curiosity. The real acceleration came with one man, Jean Nicot. In 1559, Jean Nicot was appointed France's ambassador to Portugal, and it was in Lisbon that he first encountered tobacco. In 1560, he sent tobacco seeds to Queen Catherine de' Medici of France, along with a letter praising the plant as a near-miraculous cure for everything from migraines to tumors. The queen, who suffered from chronic headaches, began inhaling powdered tobacco through her nose. It seemed to work, at least well enough that the practice spread rapidly through her court. The word nicotine still carries his name today. In 1571, the Spanish physician Nicolás Monardes published a book claiming tobacco could treat no fewer than 36 different ailments, everything from headaches to stomach cramps to warding off the plague. The book set off a sensation across Europe, and by the end of the 16th century, tobacco had reached nearly every country on the continent, earning the nickname the Queen's Herb. The irony is hard to miss. Tobacco didn't enter European life as a vice, it entered as medicine. From there, things moved almost unbelievably fast. Tobacco reached France by 1556, Portugal by 1558, Spain by 1559, and England by 1565. Portuguese sailors carried it to Japan as early as 1542. By the late 16th century, it had reached the Ottoman Empire via the Spanish, where physicians quickly began prescribing it as a remedy for various illnesses. Trade routes carried it onward into Russia and eventually into China. Think about that shift. A plant known exclusively on one continent for over 12,000 years spread across nearly the entire globe within a single century. The cigarette as we know it today, machine-rolled, mass-produced, wrapped in paper, is a genuinely recent invention, arriving with the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century. Cigarette rolling machines made it possible to produce hundreds of cigarettes per minute. Modern machines now manage thousands. That mechanical leap is what turned tobacco from a luxury enjoyed by the wealthy into a daily habit for hundreds of millions of people worldwide. If someone asks whether ancient people smoked cigarettes, the honest answer is no. Not the Egyptians, not the Greeks, not the Romans. They never encountered the plant at all. But if ancient people includes the civilizations of the Americas, the answer flips dramatically. At least 12,300 years ago, before farming existed anywhere on Earth, in the waning years of the Ice Age, tobacco's story really unfolds across two parallel worlds. On one side, an elaborate, sacred, deeply ritualized culture develops across the Americas over thousands of years. On the other, an entire hemisphere builds its own relationship with smoke through cannabis and incense, with no idea the other tradition exists. When those two worlds collided in 1492, what followed wasn't just the spread of a plant, it was one of the fastest cultural transformations in human history. Next time, someone tells you people didn't used to smoke, you'll know exactly how wrong and how surprisingly right that statement actually is. If you enjoyed this, subscribe for more deep dives into the surprising corners of human history. See you in the next one.